All right. It is 1 minute past, so let's get started. Thank you, everybody, for taking the time out of your busy day to join us. We have a great presentation for this afternoon, going over Microsoft Purview and diving into the insider risk management modules, as well as preventing data exfiltration. So this is the second of the 6 series we've been running on the Purview product from Microsoft, and we're really excited about this. Right. Steve, I don't know if it's my slide or not, but I'm still seeing the intro. So Steve, sorry if you're presenting, I can't see the next slide.
Yep, so we're showing speakers at the moment.
Oh, good. Okay, I don't see that, but hopefully everybody else does. So what we have for our speakers today, Steve Andrews, he's a director here at NetWoven. Myself, Matt Maher, I'm a technical director at NetWoven. And then David Castillo, he's from Microsoft and has been joining us through these series. All right. Next slide, Steve. I apologize, I can't see the slides as they're rotating through. Hopefully everybody else can. But who is NetWoven? I think that's the next slide, right, Steve?
Yep, that's right.
All right, who is NetWoven? We are a MISA certified Microsoft partner. That means that we're in the exclusive group of around 300 partners worldwide that focus on Microsoft security. So that is us. And then Steve, I guess, Steve, if you want to take it over because I'm having some troubles.
Will do, no worries. All right, let's get started and do a little bit of background first of all and talk about some of the challenges that we all face in this sort of space, specifically with the insider risks as well. So as we all know, both in our personal and business lives, these data services are very fragmented and spread out both sort of on and off premise and various providers, not just Microsoft, of course. And really, the data is exploding and snowballing over time. And with that, of course, there's increased costs, particularly when it comes from sort of in the compliance arena under sort of litigation and privacy. As we have more data, we have more, liability with that. And so, back to the old saying of, doing more with less, we've got, really limited staff to deal with this. And I'll get some stats on that in a second. But really, the personal liability as well on compliance and privacy, because of the complexity of the regulations and these requirements, is just, again, increasing, putting much more pressure on that. So, therefore, it really is causing the legal departments and compliance departments and those teams to transform really from cost centers to business value. And so it's quite an upheaval there.
Hey, Steve, sorry, do you mind? Some of us can't
Yes,
see
no
the
problem.
slide decks. Would you
Let me
mind
reshare.
just
I'll
stop
give it a
sharing
click.
and share again?
Sure. Let's give it a shout. Here we go. All right, how about now?
Much better. Thank you, Steve.
Let's give it a click. No problem at all. All right. So, and again, on the same topic, as I mentioned, we did some surveys out there of these the various businesses when it comes to the sort of evolving compliance landscape, and really there's like I think it's over 250, 260 updates every single day from regulatory bodies when we put it all together, and this is of course expanding when it comes to both privacy and compliance, and the sort of prediction is by sort of the end of this year, 2023, 2024, about 73% of our, the world's consumers are going to be regulated by some sort of modern privacy laws, for example. And then, we're doing this with much less rather staffing. And so, of course, that puts an incredible strain on the organization. So let's have a look then. Traditionally, when it comes to threats, it's been a case of, we always sort of thought of external threats when you looked in that arena. But internal threats is becoming more and more of an issue, and really of all of the incidents that happen, 25% of them can be attributed to the insider risks. And so it's really important to get a handle on this, and not sort of just look at the external entities with it. And then so many different types of risks. I've got this wheel up here. We've got a few I'll highlight there, sort of compliance violations. That's the classic. And some of the sort of more newer ones around, say, workplace harassment or sort of the communications policies, that sort of things there. But really, conflicts of interest, insider trading, there's all sorts of things going on within internal risk. And with that, of course, we've got all of the departments and these stakeholders that have to be involved when it comes to addressing these risks. And of course, classically, you've got the legal, security teams and HR, but then of course, ourselves with the compliance and privacy teams. And so it takes a lot of legwork, if you like, and sometimes you can say herding cats when it comes to getting these stakeholders involved in what's happening with these insider risks. So as I mentioned, it is a concern. We've got some interesting survey stats here. It's becoming more and more of a challenge. And so most of the organizations out there are concerned about being able to get a handle on these insider risks. And as I mentioned, about a quarter, 25% of data breaches are caused by insiders. And so, do not go just focusing on your externals. Don't forget about that. And so moving through then, let's have a look at Purview itself and what the elements of it are. So you can think of Purview as a sort of umbrella to several pieces or several solutions underneath that all work together to give you this complete coverage, if you like. And so what we're going to be talking about here is number 4 is flashing up there for insider risk management. But part of the wheel, if you like, of Purview, we've got our information protection element, we've got data loss prevention, e-discovery, information barriers, and information governance. Some of the newer elements of this are with information barriers, for example, and this is going to help quite a bit with the compliance arena. Let's say, especially with sort of mergers and acquisitions, or to do with, let's say, trading firms, it allows us to then put the information between barriers within the organization itself. The other elements have been around for a little while, and so are more mature, but still, it pulls all together to give us this coverage with Microsoft Purview. And just to mention on a side note, of course, we've got the Microsoft Security Copilot as well coming into the picture. And so that's going to be a very interesting move there and very interesting area to keep an eye on with our AI. So let's have a look at our insider risk management now. So what is it? And so really it's the ability to get a handle on what's going on with risky activities within inside your organization. Okay, so we're isolating anything from an external perspective. And so we're able to then leverage these predefined templates and policies in the system, which gives us a leg up would be an understatement. It really gives us a good head start to creating our coverage when it comes to insider risks. And so again, with that, of course, these templates comes the analysis, and we've got some really rich reporting with that. And leveraging this sort of AI and machine learning, we're able to pull together and see the patterns, and in these beautiful visual charts that we'll show later on, to see what's going on over time with particular users in the organization, so you can build up a profile and a picture of what's happening. And of course, as mentioned, this is part of the Purview family there. So another little interesting stats, of course, on this area. I mean, excuse me, we've got some the ones I always find interesting is that insider attacks becoming more and more frequent, of course, which is why we're having this conversation. That's not going to go away. It's just going to grow over time. But really, the amount of cost from recovering from these activities is quite insane. And really, 12 months sometimes to either to identify and both resolve the insider threats issue. So it's been going on for quite some time, but it's now sort of bubbling up to the fore. And the last one here, which is I always think a very important one, this area of security is very fragmented. And so really, both personally and professionally, I think Microsoft is doing a great job of disrupting the industry here by bringing it all into an integrated perspective. You haven't got all these silos of security products. You traditionally have organizations with saying, being very proud they have 40 or 50 different security products, but if they're all siloed, it's actually detrimental, because one piece doesn't know one arm doesn't know what the other arm's doing when it comes to an incident or a breach going on. So as I mentioned, Microsoft's got a good twist on how they approach compliance. So traditionally, we'd have a sort of very reactive or process driven with very tight resource constraints. Okay, so we've got all these organizations complaining about not having enough staff and not having enough resources to deal with this. And so really, I think it was 40, like late 40, 46, 48% of organizations are saying that their legal and compliance teams are significantly understaffed. So it's very interesting to be able to get a handle on this with as much automation as possible. So with that, Microsoft is turning it around a little by putting a ton of AI, machine learning, and automation into this process, so that you can, as an organization, get a handle on your insider risks, with the teams that you have right now, even if they are understaffed. So let's have a look. We've got a couple of use cases that I wanted to talk through, and then what I'll do is I'll show those in the insider risk management portal there, so you can see how it works. So the first one we've got is pretty much a classic. It's a data leakage use case. And so here, as I'm stating, we've got an employee that is suspected of, downloading or exfiltration of confidential documents from the organization's SharePoint or SharePoint Online site. And so this employee could be, let's say, they've handed in their notice and they're doing their 2 weeks, or it can be someone who's just doing it, throughout their work life, if you like. So the first thing to think about is that, nobody or very little people are very much pure Microsoft shops, if you like. Most organizations have many different types of services. And let's say, for example, when it comes to storage, we've got Dropbox, Google Drive, Box, etc., and many others there. So again, the insider risk management can be extended to these non-Microsoft environments. So it's an important thing to note. They don't just focus on the Microsoft, storage repositories. It can be extended to these other third-party ones. And of course, you want to make sure that it is extended to those, because that's where we'll find some interesting documents, I'm sure, or interesting files in these outer-lying storage platforms. And then, when you think about the user activity, putting yourself in their shoes, if they're trying to get, let's say, blueprints or a document out, they usually do a few different steps, either before or after as well. Like, say, in an example here, I've got they could be zipping files together, compressing them, but also, renaming them to try and make it look a little less obvious. That's another classic one. But, or encrypting them as well. So insider risk management can track this behavior and also track it over time. So we can see in the sequences and be able to then get a much, higher percentage of rate that this is what they're actually doing. And again, so, just think about the steps of they're trying to remove a file from the organization. They'll probably put it into a zip file or rename it before they try and get it out to make it look less obvious. But the system can pick this up. And again, it builds the profile over time of that. And to mention here, this is, of course, with our channels and key events. And it's a beautiful, I'll show you a little bit later on, it's a beautifully visual way of seeing it. And it means that the alerts can be a lot more accurate and you can get a good, clearer picture of what's going on. Also, helping this is with you selecting the sensitive information types and labels here. So, and again, this is going to reduce your false positives. You can say, okay, I just want to show documents with the confidential, for example, label on, and it'll keep much more of a deeper eye on that. And then lastly, which is coming on a bundle in its operation, is the adaptive protection. And this, of course, has got the machine learning leveraging this. And so here, and I'll talk about this a little bit later, a bit more depth. So here we can, again, have, for example, a data loss prevention policy trigger different actions within the insider system. So now, I know I've mentioned already a little bit about leveraging the automation. So let's just have a look at that for a moment. Because really, it can be really tedious, when it comes to compliant management. And really, organizations and, people struggle with knowing the actual sort of degree of compliance that they've got with specific regulations. It can be a little bit of a sort of a black hole in a sense. And of course, as I mentioned, like 250 odd changes per day is happening with these regulations. So it makes that situation quite daunting. So really, leveraging then these automation is going to really help with sort of point in time assessments, let's say, with your quarterly, semi-annual or annual audits, but also, it's going to help eliminate the blind spots. And really, the compliance score is a great way of helping with that, and that's a built-in feature with this. Control mapping, continuous regulatory updates, tongue twister, and also continuous assessments, like letting the system do a lot of this legwork for you. And so really when we talk about empowerment as well, and this is of course when we've got smart to help us with smart data handling decisions. Let's see, we've got SharePoint site, which may have a lot of unused personal information in it or personal data. We've got, instead of checking with that sort of the site owner manually or, through email or IM, etc., we should be able to sort of leverage some policies that will then trigger recommended actions, and in this case, say with the SharePoint site. And so to that data owner, it empowers them to take smart data handling decisions. So you give them those, you're empowering them in that way. And really, when it comes to AI and machine learning, leveraging this to accelerate your sort of data review process. And again, there's a lot of legwork when it comes to review huge amounts of data when it comes to litigation or subject rights requests. We should be able to leverage a solution powered by AI and machine learning that really does, for example, deduplicate the data, deal with conflicts, and automate these repetitive tasks that take such a huge amount of time suck from us on this already spread thin team. Let's see, efficiency, and again, automation comes into play here. When we talk about, say, audits or with our technical controls, instead of being able to manually go through these controls during the internal audits, the solution should be able to help us connect these regulatory requirements to the technical controls natively. And so you should be then automatically able to assess these controls. Let's say, a good example would be with multi-factor. We should be able to see and detect if multi-factor control is implemented or not easily. And so the compliance management tool is able to natively integrate with the MFA solution. And again, so one of Microsoft's strengths is the integration between these different systems in security. And so it can see the status of that in your organization. And then that, of course, would affect your compliance score. Privacy resilient workplace, which is a good one here. So having the built-in tools and that balance between security and productivity. So having these built-in tools available within the organization, let's see, we can have the employees then directly use these tools in their daily work. Let's say if a user attempts to send, let's say, personal information across geo boundaries that we've set up, this should be blocked in real time, for example. And so again, having the tools at the fingertips for employees, it's just gold. Then when it comes to automatically mapping, so unique and shared data sources, have this, remove the legwork of this. So have this done automatically. It's really a great bonus. So just going to have a little mention about insider risk, the adaptive protection piece. And so here, again, we're leveraging the automation. And so this really combines the functionality of both the sort of Purview insider risk management, but also with the Purview data loss prevention. And this is leveraging artificial intelligence between these two systems. And so it's really there to give you much more enhanced protection for your sensitive data. And really leveraging the AI to identify and mitigate then these potential risks that come with this data. And so really the machine learning is going to go ahead and dynamically assign these appropriate data loss prevention policies on users, depending on their risk level. It does assign a risk score to those users. And then analyzing the content and activities really comes back and then affects that user's risk score. And so we can then really much more effectively block, for example, data sharing. And it can only be applied to high-risk users, while the low-risk users can maintain the productivity. So if you've got some problem areas with users, we can just really attach it to those without affecting other people. And so, the policy controls they can be constantly adjusting. And so as a user's risk level changes, either increases or decreases, the appropriate policy is assigned to them depending on, the change in that risk level. And so, it really helps you detect where the critical risks are. And it's really context aware when it comes to the detection. And machine learning, of course, is leveraged here with both the analysis of both the content and the user activities. And so therefore we can then enforce the effective controls on these high-risk users, and it's very fluid and dynamic, but then not affect other users who are not part of this high-risk area. So it's a good growing one to see. So in Insider Risk, of course, in the console or the portal itself, we've got the dashboard. So I'll take you through this a piece of this in a moment. And so this is really the one-stop shop for everything to do with Insider Risk. And it is very clearly laid out, of course, drilled down as classic Microsoft administrative portals are. And you can straight away see at a glance what's going on with the organization and see what's going on with the organization's cases when it comes to Insider Risk. And so really it's a very slick portal. And again, it's giving you a clear view of what's happening in your organization. So with that, let's have a look. We'll go ahead and let's see, if I go back here, excuse me, just one moment. Excuse me. Now, if we talked about the data leakage use case a moment ago. So what I'm going to do now is go through, step us through some of the pieces within the Insider Risk Management as to how we configured to deal with this use case. So first of all, we've got our policies. And so as we've logged into our Insider Risk Management portal, and again, you can see here, I've clicked on our policies tab. We've got a few here already. But what we've done here, we've created these policies around to control this particular data leakage. So if I go through and I'll show you what we've done with our configuration here. Okay, so here, as I mentioned, the user in this use case could be somebody who's, let's say, given their 2 weeks notice, and they are then, doing some unscrupulous things with documents in the organization at the moment. So we've got our policy here, and we've got our data theft by departing users, we're calling it here. So as you can see here, all of the items are easy touch, easy view to see what's going on. It's showing us the risk factors here. And in this particular case, it's showing 9 exfiltration activities. And when we scroll through the portal, it's showing, where these files are going. So here we're showing like 6 of the files have gone to a cloud, some have been archived. And so this is what's flagged up here for this particular user. Okay, so the triggering event. And what we had here is we had a HR connector, which again is pulling in the data from HR, in this case, either the terminated or given their notice user. So immediately the system is going to start honing in on those users, more pinpointing on them to see what their activities are, because it knows that they're going to be leaving soon. And so in this case, we had an engineer leave. And so it's really monitoring him very closely. So over time as well, we can see the exfiltration activities here. At this particular example, there's not much done because it's just started looking at them. And again, from these exfiltration activities, sequences of activity can be triggered. And again, because we've just started monitoring this user, there's no sequence of activity come out of it. But again, it does build up over time a very rich view. And if we go into the alert analysis, and this is where it's giving us a wonderful visual so we can see what's happening with this user over time. So, of course, we've got the trigger here of the employment end date sent by HR through the connector. Then we can see, as I mentioned, some of the sequences that people tend to do when it comes to trying to disguise, if you like, what they're doing when they're removing documents and files from the organization. So here you can see it's triggered because files have been renamed. And also 4 of them had the labels on confidential. So if you remember, you can actually pinpoint the policies to the sensitivity labels applied. In this case, we did. We said, keep an eye on this user and keep an eye on it specifically with confidential documents. And so it has picked up 4 of these, and that user has tried to rename them. And also here, with this user again, they've been deleting files on their desktop, on their Windows machine. And so in this case, it's picked up 12 events of that happening, of those files being deleted. Then also, it's monitoring the SharePoint activity, of course. So here it's showing us that they've accessed, 2 sensitive files from the SharePoint site internally from the intranet, and then these files had medical information in them, all sorts of things around, so anything to do with sort of HIPAA in this case. So it's been flagged up that way. And then also here, it's picked up that they have moved some sensitive documents, again, some confidential label documents to a different area, which is, again, it's very interesting. So over time, as you can see here with the legend, it's very, very straightforward to see what's going on. Let's say through our deletion, for example, you can see here the patterns of deletion they've been doing over time. But then also collection, as I mentioned here, they're moving to a new location. It sort of looks like they started to put files somewhere to get them ready to remove or to move them outside of the organization or try to. And then let's see the files renamed. We can see a bit of a pattern of those over time. But you've got all of this rich information and it's graphically visible. And so before you'd have to go through tons of reports, which would be very, very tedious, and you'd go cross-eyed in the end trying to understand what's going on. Whereas here it's putting it into a very, very clear pattern. And as over time, this gets richer and richer. Now, I know, in this use case example, we were looking at a user who was given their notice or is going to be let go, but it still has a profile of them being built over time. So when this starts drastically changing visually, you know there is something up and you can then drill down into it and see what's going on. So with that, we can go ahead and create a case. And so here, create a case name, give it a name, and put some comments in there. So it's very, very clear, because don't forget you're working with, you're collaborating rather with different teams in the organization, such as HR, legal, and compliance. So it's good to make the descriptions as rich as possible, so it's easy for people to figure out when they're reviewing as well. And so, of course, these are put into a case summary, and you can see all of the cases that are being worked on at the moment. And here, so I'm just showing you one example. And so here you can get a quick look at the status of it. And we can, of course, see it's active, but we could see, the load progress and what's going on from a simple snapshot. So if we drill down into that case that we've created, and here, as I mentioned, one of the strengths again of this of the Microsoft Security Suites is the ability to connect with all of the other solutions and platforms. And so, for example, here in our case actions, we can go ahead and directly send an email notice. We can escalate this for investigation. Let's say, we've seen that they're moving files to a different area, they're renaming files, they're doing all sorts of interesting things that, red flag for investigation. So we can do that directly. And then this can automatically then connect through and notify our compliance and HR and security departments that they would be then involved in this investigation. And we could also, of course, automate as much as we can here, but also then sharing purely for informational, but also for collaboration reasons with other departments. Okay. And of course, here, if we want to resolve the case, we can just go ahead and do it straight away there. So with that, and our notice templates. So here, as I mentioned, there's a lot of, this term out of the box, even though it's not so relevant anymore physically. A lot of templates within the product that make you hit the ground running and give you a great leg up to starting. So also, of course, you can create the templates from scratch yourself and customize them. So in this example here, we've created a simple end user notice that will be triggered automatically. And in this case, we're saying, okay, this is an automated message from the compliance team at the organization saying, that we've recent activity you've done has been flagged, and it could be the renaming of those confidential documents. So it's letting people know that it's almost like when you walk into either let's say a bank, and you see the sign saying, security cameras in operation. A lot of times, this sort of preventative and notification can just quash it right at the beginning. But here, we're saying that this is outside of the code of conduct that you are governed by. And, you can reach out, of course, to HR to have any questions on this if you believe it's not the case. But all of these notices can be automatically triggered off depending on the instance the alerts that's been picked up. So going back to our adaptive protection, which we talked about a moment ago, I just grabbed the dashboard of that. And so here, we can see, because remember, the data loss prevention policies are the main triggers here. We've got 2 DLP policies created in this example. And so here, remembering that the risk level is attributed to the user. So if I go through and click there, and this, of course, is very fluid, depending on what their behavior is. And so, how risky is their daily activity or their workplace activity going on. How much, and as we can see here, exfiltration activities have been performed, and this, of course, is going to be increasing their risk alert, the risk scoring. And so here, it's going to be, we're taking such a huge amount of legwork out of it to give these, internal teams that are already stretched thin, the tools to be able to do this without, killing themselves, so to speak. And so the user assigned risk levels we've got here. And again, these are the levels that will trigger the policies used in adaptive protection. So whether it generates the alert or not, of course, depending on which risk level that particular user has. And with our DLP policies, you can see here, we've got the two created. In this case, we've got one both for endpoint data loss and as well within Teams and Exchange. So, these are our main triggers that feed into adaptive protection. And then the last area of this particular portal is the settings in there. And again, it's just giving us the description of that. It's really on or off. It's wonderful. And so you can choose whether to anonymize the user data information in there or to let it show the users, depending on who, of course, is going to be reviewing this information. And with that, of course, that ties in nicely with the different roles and the role groups that are created for insider risk. Because, you've got your analysts through to, admins. And of course, within these role groups, depending on which role group you're in as an organization member, is, of course, depending on what rights you can see and to whether you see certain information or whether it's redacted or not. And so, again, out of the box, you've got these great ones to get you going. I don't think I've seen one instance of these being needed to add to, so they pretty much do cover and they are very well rounded. And so, again, bear that in mind and do leverage these. It's really important, like you should do with all of these RBACs within both Azure and security portals. So what happens if you decide not to do anything? If you're going to put your head in the sand, what are some of the things that can come back and bite you over that? So, the first one, of course, is reputational damage and, damage to your brand. You're going to be called out in the news, as we do see with breaches, for example, right now. And, it's going to cost the organization a heck of a lot when it comes to the sort of brand integrity. And, customers will start going to another provider of that solution as well. So that's the number one we find. And then, of course, another one, which is more on the physical side, is, loss of the intellectual property. So, is this the blueprints to, your systems or designs? Is it, the strategy plans and documents, buying habits, transportation habits, anything like that? And so that can give, your competitors quite a leg up if they know your inner workings when it comes to the intellectual property or business secrets, as we call them. And so you could then find your competitors, overtaking you in that case by knowing this information. And then, from an end user or customer perspective, the loss of trust. I know myself, if I do see particular vendors that I use and the ones that have more breaches than others, I'm going to really, push my business towards the ones that are more secure. So I don't have to keep dealing with the breach notices all the time and, worrying about my identity theft status. And, so you'll find that customers do move away from the organizations that do have a lot of breaches and that do have issues with these risks, be it external or internal. And then, of course, from a cash perspective, we've got our fines that are, issued out by the regulatory bodies that we are governed by, and these can be quite hefty indeed. Okay, so with that, let's say we are a wonderfully compliant organization. What does that involve? So we've got sort of 6 elements, I like to call it here, of the compliant organization, and these are the areas that you need to be, aware of and focused on and driving. First one we've got, of course, is our data security governance. And again, making sure that the sensitive data you've got within your organization is in the right hands and, has the right controls on it. Our second one, data privacy governance. So again, accountability when it comes to the data we've got inside the organization and the data practices that cover it. And are they, meeting the regulatory standards that they should be? And our third one, which is, of course, is more of a newer element, is our AI or artificial intelligence governance. And again, making sure that our both development or deployment or use of AI tools and systems are, as we're saying here, ethical, responsible, and aligned with the values of an interests of society around us. So not just our own organizational values, but with our community around us as well. Data access governance is a pretty straightforward one. So who has access to what data in the organization? And this one, can connect a lot with the sort of zero trust principles. And this, of course, comes underneath our data governance categories. And so really, as I mentioned here, we've got the availability, usability, integrity, and security of the data. And so, the process that manages those elements, is that doing the right job? And is that, being audited? Is it being checked? And is that in place working properly? Data lifecycle management. So again, here we're saying the process of managing data throughout its life cycle, from the very start when it's created, all the way through when it's being leveraged and used, till destruction and deletion at the end. And particularly with the ending here, because classically, let's say with tax records, you've got 7 years with those. And so if you're going to keep them longer than 7 years, you can do that. But if you're subpoenaed or requested by court for information, they will get all of those records. So you're increasing your exposure and liability tremendously by keeping things longer than you need to. And so it's really good to keep an eye on this and make sure that, depending on what the information is in the organization and what the regulatory body is, that you only keep it for the amount of time you have to. And then, it's either an automated process to destroy it, or it's a combination where it's give you a summary of, okay, these items or this data is going to be deleted by say the end of the month. Yes, no. Have that in place so you do reduce your liability. And data retention governance, again, implementation of policy standards and technologies and controls that how where it's stored and how it's accessed. And then it does touch on the data lifecycle management and how it's deleted according to the right legal body and regulatory body that it's underneath. Okay, so that if you've got all of these in place, you're doing very, very well. So let's talk about implementation specifically with insider risk for a minute. It can seem like it's a lot to deal with, but we're going to break it down a little bit here to make it easier to choose, so to speak. And so in the classic elements of, and this is of course a NetWoven and Microsoft SKU on implementation when it comes to insider risk management. So requirements gathering, and in this area, and I've just grabbed some highlights from each of these. Doing a good discovery of what's going on in the environment already in the organization, and getting, of course, a lot of details out of the existing setup and what is happening with insider risk in the organization at the moment. And so with those requirements gathering sessions, you do need to collaborate with all the different departments and teams in the organization to make sure you get a clear picture of what's happening at the moment. And I've got here as well, not forgetting, which is often overlooked, endpoint data loss prevention. And this endpoint, we mean, desktops, laptops, tablets, mobile phones, anything that's the end user is attached to or can access to get the organization's data. And again, do collaborative workshops with this. It is really important to go through and do every department and make them, both feel involved, because then that helps with your adoption and change management, but also to get a good picture of the organization as a whole. Use cases would be next. So I'm such a fan of these, because if you spend the time and effort to get these use cases up, it gives you an exact picture of the organization. So then if the technology can be then configured around these use cases, you're gold. Without use cases, you're sort of stabbing in the dark a little bit and hoping that that the solution is going to work with the organization. And so in this example here, we're saying, okay, we're going to go ahead and create 8 use cases, because you don't need a lot. And we will then make sure that the solution matches around those use cases. Then moving into more of the technology itself, the configuration of it. And so here we're going to go through and do the architecture of the Purview solution that we're putting in place, and then reviewing, in this case, the insider risk management policies, and making sure they're implemented. And we've got then with the indicators that the alerting and monitoring is working. And that does tie in with the later phase here. And adaptive protection, this is where we were talking about that. We would go ahead and have this configured, and that ties in with our data loss policies as well, as you can see in our next section here when it comes to deployment. getting our endpoints in, and it's often overlooked. I'm not quite sure why, but having our endpoints and the data loss prevention around those endpoints is really, really important. And what I've got here as well, as I mentioned back with the use cases, our adoption and change management. This is, really critical, and again, often overlooked, just like use cases. If you clearly involve all the different teams and clearly put out a communications plan, whatever the solution is, not just, of course, inside a risk, but making sure that everyone in the organization understands what's happening and why it's happening and what the specific, important dates are to remember. And if they have to do any actions or activities around those dates, the adoption change management is really critical to have that in place. And then here, about this time is where the deployment would do the connections and integrations with Sentinel, getting that into your SEIM and having all of these security solutions within the Microsoft stack communicate clearly with each other. And again, it's really easy to do that with Microsoft and, with the various connectors that they have with the products, but leveraging all that and getting then the powerful synergy, really, if you like, for all of these products working together when it comes to securing your environment. Monitoring, real time is a nice critical one. It's no good, especially with security. It really needs to be real time because otherwise, if you're looking at a report that's a day old or a couple of hours old, especially when you're dealing with an incident or a breach, it's already irrelevant. And so, doing tests with that as well with the monitoring, making sure it is working as intended. And as I mentioned as well, the connection with other solutions, not just Microsoft, of course, but making sure that they all do flow together. And then, of course, at the end of it, managed services, if you don't have the staff to help with this or deal with this, it can be, have this elements or the security elements outsourced. And it's something that we, now often do a lot. And this, in some examples of here, well, what would they do in managed services? So here, reviewing the Purview roadmap, and of course, that changes over time from the Microsoft perspective. And so keeping tabs on that and then relaying that information and making sure that the organization or the customer is aligned with that and, keeping the changes up to date. Another example, data protection policy enforcement, making sure those policies are still relevant and they are still working. And again, the action comes out of them is as intended. And it can be as simple as well as, from a ticket perspective, responding to incidents and again, assisting with remediations. So, and this can be both reactive and preactive to help your organization. If you are running very lean on staffing, we can take a lot of that load off you. So that's really looking at from an implementation perspective. So now, how does it fit in with the sort of roadmap, if you like? So this is a great visualization of when we're talking about security modernization all the way through. So starting off with your modernization journey when it comes to security, identity is the foundation for everything. And so I'm going to harp on about this a lot, making sure your identity and access management solution, be it Entra or another third party, making sure that is rock solid and operating correctly. Because if there's holes in that, just think about it, if you've got a rocky foundation or holes in your foundation, anything on top of that is not going to be very well suited either. So then moving through, once we've done our identity and access management, we've got our device provisioning brought in properly. In this case, we've got Intune example. So we've got our endpoints, if you remember talking about that earlier, and having those pulled in with the information protection with our, say, DLP for endpoints, or Intune, for example, Defender for endpoints, having them all covered tightly with our compliance and governance there. Now, so where does insider risk come in? You can see I've got it, just have it here. This comes in just around about this time in the roadmap. We'll get that insider risk management in. Then moving through, of course, it all ties in really these sort of two areas through Blur. With our data loss policies, e-discovery, we've got our retention, and we've also got SEIM, like Sentinel, for example, coming in, all the way through then to managed services, if again, you need assistance to try and to dealing with the lean security team. And so, excuse me, really this does lay it out in a very straightforward way, and it's going to help you sort of put it into perspective and have then these pieces broken down so you can, manageably deal with it. So having a look then outside of Microsoft, let's see, how does it compare when it comes to insider risk management and with other vendors that do a similar task. And so here I pulled a comparison with IRM and versus another vendor, Code 42. And so what I've got is a few of the areas highlighted where there do seem to be quite a bit of differences, and these differences I feel are very important. The first one is around integration. Now, as I mentioned with the Microsoft security stack, all these products are easily connected together, and there's out of the box connectors for almost every instance, if you like. So that does mean then the overall security stance of the organization is going to be very tight, because the different areas or different pieces within the security elements are all communicating together. And especially when you are dealing with an incident or a breach, it's incredibly important for them to know what's going on. You see some organizations where they've got the 40 or 50 different security products, but they're also siloed, and there can be an incident or breach going on in one, and the rest of the organization is unaware and just carrying on like a normal day. Whereas if it is integrated, then they're leveraging the automation, the machine learning and AI to really put a quash as quickly as possible on the incident or the breach. And so it's really super critical to make sure that it is integrated. And the next one I pulled out is around the way that the products score. And so, Microsoft Insider Risk Management uses a numerical risk scoring method, which really assigns a numerical value to each of the risk indicators. And then by aggregating that together, you get a risk score for each user. And that is a really effective way of showing the severity and frequency of that user's risky behavior. So in the Code 42, it uses a slightly different methodology, which is really, it's called the exposure model, and it's really measuring the volume and velocity of data moving by each user. And so the risk exposure is reflecting the amount and type of data the user has exfiltrated or accessed. So it's really not as accurate way of governing or showing rather what the user risk level is. And then, of course, as I mentioned, with our templates and, giving you the sort of head start and leg up out of the box, there's just a ton of templates with Insider Risk Management that get you started. And these are growing all the time because they keep getting added to or, modified. When I pulled up with Code 42, you had a very few or very limited templates in there. So it meant, it's a lot more legwork to get the product going and to make changes, of course, in the future. And it's really so Insider Risk Management has got tons of built-in policy templates that will cover the most common insider risk scenarios. They've done their homework on it, like data theft. We saw departing users, data leaks again, or just security policy violations rather. And of course, you can create your own custom ones as well, and you can leverage these in creating your custom ones as well. So it does make the process a lot faster. Also, when it comes to what can the system do? So here, the amount of actions that are available within insider risk management, you can do such a lot depending on the alert generated by the policies. Like you saw earlier with the note template, sending a note to the user. You can then go ahead and dismiss the alert in there. You can escalate it. Of course, escalate to HR or legal, or resolve it, or say it's a false positive. But it can all be done in the one place. You don't have to jump around with different areas or different admin consoles. But really, some of the strengths I feel is really around the collaborative side. Being able to collaborate with other teams and stakeholders in the organization. If you remember right at the beginning, that's one of the challenges. There's so many stakeholders have to be involved when it comes to insider risk, and so this makes it really as easy as possible. And again, this is like, say, the managers of the different departments when it comes to investigation, so you can then really handle the alerts effectively and appropriately. What I found with Code 42, it really had limited actions that you could do when the policy is generating these alerts. You could send a notification to the user, to be fair, you could do that, but there was really no other really things you can do within the product that would then help you deal with that particular alert. You can export it, of course, to other SEIMs there. All right. So it's just things to bear in mind with that Microsoft versus other solutions in the security arena here. All right, to summarize then, you really, to be able to mitigate compliance and privacy risks effectively, you've got to, of course, identify the problem areas and then take action on these hidden insider risks that you found. And taking action is the key word here, to actually deal with it. But both, foster safe and compliant communications, meaning, okay, you're letting people know that something is going on. So you could do like we just saw with the note templates, to let them know, okay, this is outside of the compliance standard that we have, for example. But then, so if it does, let's say, that carry on or get worse, we can go ahead and then investigate and have all of the information at our fingertips. And so to be able to come up with an educated decision on that investigation. Okay, next steps. Excuse me. We've got a primer workshop, which is free for data security and governance. So do reach out to us if you'd be interested in doing that. There is advanced ones as well, data security and governance workshops, and also, help with discovery and planning. As an attendee, you'll get an ebook on this topic, and you can also request that from info@networking.com. And of course, just to recap as well, this is the, I think, second or third in the series of webinars. And so the next one after this is the Copilot, which will be a very interesting one. It's a hot area with the AI. And so there's a lot coming up here. So with that, what's any of our questions we've got coming up?
Great. Thanks, Steve. I did get 2 in the chat, so let me just bring those out.
Sure.
Sean asked, is there a way I can watch my entire company with insider risk? Yes, you could put everybody from your company into policies, but that kind of defeats what the insider risk management policies are about. I think you'd also run into some template limits of, I think it's around 15,000 per template that you can watch, but you can have 20 of them. So unless you're at a very, very, very large company, I think you could work it out. But again, I don't think the idea of insider risk management is to watch everybody. You would want to watch those high risk users that have privileged information or that are leaving. Some of those use cases that Steve went over. And then the next question Nicole asked, is insider risk included with my E5 license? It is. So insider risk is part of Purview and would be covered with either an E5 license or I think you can do an E5 compliance license. And if you don't have E5, you can always use the insider risk add-on license to some of those the E3 or an F3 license. Great. I think those were all the questions that came over in chat. Again, thank you everybody for taking the time out of your day. And as a next steps, Steve mentioned, we do have free workshops, and then we also have the ebook that is a 4-step guide to bulletproof insider risk management with Microsoft Purview. And so please reach out and we'll be sure to share that ebook along with this deck to all the participants. So thank you, everybody. Have a great rest of the day. And thank you, Steve, for walking us through IRM.
Thanks, guys.
Bye, all.